You're listening to the Business Communicators, presented by IABC Houston.
Joining us now on the Business Communicators is Brandon Leake. And if you're not familiar with Brandon, you should be. Not only is he a role model in my mind, he is also one of the most talented young communicators in the country. And he's a gifted storyteller through art of poetry and spoken word. He's the founder of Called to Move, the 2020 winner of America's Got Talent, and will be here in Houston on Monday, November 30th for an exclusive one-night only event at the Houston Improv. Brandon, that was an absolute mouthful, but you deserve such a great introduction. Thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today.
Well, thank you all for the invite and the ability to be here. Sorry if things ever get spotty. As I said, I unfortunately had something to help take care of with some family, but I'm super excited to be here with you all and to come see y'all in Houston because I've never been there.
Well, Texas is a great place. You'll definitely have to get some barbecue recommendations from Thomas. He can help you out with that. But Brandon, when I was in high school, I competed in speech and debate. And one of the events that I, dabbled in a little bit was oratory. And I was probably a better debater and extemporaneous speaker than I was an orator. But I was always fascinated by, the local talent and just what they could do to perform. What was it that motivated you to get your start in spoken word and poetry?
My start in poetry really came about because I started noticing girls were cute in middle school. That's the most sincere route to put it. And since I couldn't sing, I would write poems. But like my real start with it in college came after the passing of one of my best friends, and just needing an outlet to be able to share my emotions, and a notebook never judged me, and that became a safe haven for me. So I just kept on writing.
At Simpson University, you founded Called to Move. How have you seen your profession or your craft grow throughout the years?
So one of the biggest ways of growth that I've had is that I stopped being the only poet in the room. Coming from like a competitive athletic background, like I love getting critical feedback on how to become better. And in college, being one of the few poets there, everybody would just say, "Hey, we love your work," but no one would ever give me critique on how to be better. So that's a huge form of change, is that I surround myself with artists who are better than me. And then just professionally, I started learning to not just love it, but to also respect my craft as well.
When I hear you speak, it brings to mind of Gil Scott-Heron. Are there any artists out there that you could think of that inspire you? I mean, your voice is so powerful. It's so raw with emotion, and it really touched my heart, everything. And I think my most favorite performance that I watched was the one when you talked about your dad. And it hit me so hard. And it's not because my dad wasn't there for me. It's just that I could just hear the passion in your voice. I can just hear the disappointment. So what other artists out there inspire you?
Yeah, that's a huge compliment, first and foremost, that Gil Scott-Heron one. I'm like, wow. I wouldn't throw myself up there yet, but artists who inspire me are in a myriad of like artistic forms. So like Dave Chappelle as a comedian inspires me. Rudy Francisco as a poet inspires me. Kendrick Lamar as a rapper inspires me. Like these types of people. Martin Luther King Jr. as an orator inspires me. So I would say those types of people. And the biggest person who's inspired me is my mama. So she's a real life Superman, and I absolutely love her.
As a follow-up question, I read somewhere that you were described as a civil rights activist, fighting for justice in certain ways. How do you see yourself in this particular arena? How do you use your art and your craft to move people in a different way based on, all the social injustice that's going on in the world?
I'm blanking on her name. She's a famous musician from like the early eras, like the 50s and the 60s. I don't want to say Ella Fitzgerald, but I'm going to say Ella Fitzgerald. And then if I think of the name, then I'll come back to it. Stated that art is a reflection of the times. and everybody reflects on time differently based on their experiences. So for myself, in terms of my civil rights activism, it's sincerely just me describing my real life experiences and the times that we live in. So yeah, I talk about civil rights issues because it's become normalized in a way to see Black bodies die on screen. And that's an unfortunate circumstance that I don't want my daughter to grow up in. So I do stand on the front lines of justice, and I use my art to do so because I know that I want a better tomorrow. So yeah, my role in this whole thing is to utilize my art to build a platform for Black voices and minority voices to be heard, and in my community to build a better community in my disenfranchised areas. So part of that is actually helping to build our first Black-owned grocery store in a food desert that I used to live in back in Southside Stockton, and utilizing the funds from my art to help put that into motion.
Are you speaking of Nina Simone?
Nina Simone, there it is.
There you go.
I'm like, I know it's not Ella Fitzgerald, but I'm like, who is it?
Yes, yeah. When you said civil rights, I said, you know, that name's on the tip of my tongue too. And that's right, Nina Simone. That's it.
That's awesome.
Yes, Nina Simone. Love Nina Simone.
Yes, me too.
That's awesome, Brandon. And, you know, just kind of watching your performance, I can't remember which round it was on America's Got Talent, but, you know, when you were talking about your mom calling you Pookie and just hearing, you know, your experience, I mean, I had chills. And that's, I don't know, it's amazing to see how you really dive into these personal experiences and trials. And, you know, in previous episodes of the podcast, we focused on mental health and, you know, why it's important to talk about, you know, struggles and our experiences. But when you were on America's Got Talent, you gave us a peek inside of your life, you know, and sharing those intimate and powerful family stories, you know, everything from your sister to your mom and the Pookie story to, you know, your baby girl, in the finale night. Why is it so important for you to be so open and candid, you know, with your life experiences in such an open forum?
When I write my poems, at least historically, it's been for the purpose of not only finding healing for myself, but also trying to then utilize my voice to help others find or be able to see things from my perspective. And so empathy is something I try to elicit from people's emotional capacity when I'm doing a poem. And so everybody has family, whether or not they're close to them, they're not close to them, whether or not they hate them or love them. Being able to, in particular on my time on the show, utilize poetry that people could see the specifics of my story, but then plug themselves in as if they were me. That was kind of the goal, because to be honest, I'm not the same type of entertainment as my friend Brett Loudermilk, who swallows swords. I'm not the same type of entertainment as my friend Alan Silva, who swings from silks, or my homegirl Shakira, who sings phenomenally. I knew what I was going to go up there and do was to try to make statements on time where people would be able to plug themselves in. And so that's the purpose of it, is to make it relatable enough to where the audience can, in a sense, see themselves in the story.
I thought that's what was so beautiful about it. You know, I've watched America's Got Talent for so many different years, and there has never been, you know, an artist like you. There is never, it's always, you know, singers, musicians, dancers. Those are the ones who end up generally in the finals. And I think back to your golden buzzer moment when Howie Mandel pressed that button. And I think that was probably the first show in which COVID-19 had started taking over. There was no audience. And then the rest of the show changed. Everything was done virtually. It was done in person without crowds. What was the journey like for you on that moment when Howie pressed that golden buzzer to, you know, the confetti falling down when you were named champion?
Man, There's so much that happened. Like, you're right. My episode with where I got my golden buzzer was one in which, like, it was the first episode with no audience due to COVID. We had just shut down California. And like, I almost didn't make it because my car died on the freeway. I didn't get there until 2 a.m. the day of the performance, and we had to do everything at 8 in the morning. So it was so jam-packed and busy. But getting the golden buzzer felt like validation. And then from there, each poem kind of took a life of its own. Like my Pookie poem, which came next, I knew that was going to be a risk because I wasn't sure, especially in our high tension times around racial discussions at that moment in time, I wasn't sure how America would respond. I wasn't sure how America would be able to listen to a young Black man go up there and profess that there needs to be change for this. But they responded and they kept me around. And from there, I took another risk in going even more deeply personal when I talked about my father. And so like it just kind of felt like high risk, high reward at every moment. And the ultimate release and validation came once the confetti dropped and I won. And I knew, I was like, man, this journey was worth it. Not seeing my kid for almost a full month because my wife and my daughter couldn't come with me to the show. Like it all was worth the sacrifice of being there. And also the journey poetically was worth it. Knowing all that I had sacrificed up until that point over the past decade was worth it.
So this morning I was re-listening to some of your shows and or watching because I was getting ready. And so sorry, AGT, for not watching the YouTube, but still you get credit for the view, even though it was just on in the background. I was listening to your letters to your daughter. And I have a daughter that's 5 and another one that's 1. And I'm not going to lie, it was a little dusty in my room as I was getting ready this morning from your oration. So this question is kind of how, as we're business communicators, what are some of the tips and tricks that you can use that we can all use? One, for me to help communicate better with my 1-year-old or 5-year-old daughter, but more broadly in a sense of business communications, because so many times we're called to do presentations or give impromptu speeches or podcasts or even writing things. So what are some of the tips and tricks that you do to help stay on top of your craft, and some of the advice that you can give to some of our listeners?
Understand your proficiency of communication would be my first suggestion. If you're not a good verbal communicator, then you have to then go verbally communicate. Take your time to gather your thoughts, maybe write things down, get yourself collected together so that way you can express it in a way in which you can be confident in doing so. Don't just go off the cuff if that's not what you're good at. Also, try to make things as least emotional as possible when you're having these types of discussions. Because the more emotionally driven things are, oftentimes the more left or right they'll end up going for you. And most of the time, the more emotionally driven, usually they end up not going in your own favor. So those would be 2 of my biggest suggestions. And a third one would be the golden rule is, as you're communicating with somebody, be mindful of the fact, not just how you would like to be communicated to, but if you know this person, consider how they enjoy being communicated to. Like if you have somebody who, like is going through a tough time, and, or like, let's say business wise, like you're going into a business meeting and like the intentions of this company, go in there with information that's relevant to them, not just spitfiring a bunch of information that is useless to them. Or if you're going into a personal conversation, be mindful of where they're at emotionally and how they're doing, so that way you can talk to them. Because if you go to your 1-year-old and have a conversation with them about how they're doing and how they need to pick up their toys, and you go screaming, of course they're gonna cry. That's what they do. But if you go in there gracefully and say, hey, it's time for us to pick up these toys, then you'll get a way better response.
great parenting advice for the parents that are listening to this podcast, and also just general comms advice. I think it's really important to remember that you should know your audience and develop relationships. I think that, is a key takeaway. So not only is Brandon, a great orator and poet, storyteller, but that's why he's, in my mind, one of the most impressive communicators in the country right now. But Brandon, as we mentioned at the top of the show, you'll be here in Houston on November 30th at the Houston Improv. And for those that are listening in Dallas, you'll actually be in Dallas on December 1st at the Addison Improv Comedy Club. And I know, COVID-19 has kind of changed things. And so for those that are interested in attending either one of those shows, what can they expect from the performance?
You can expect social distancing and masks required. So if you're trying to roll through and you're the type of person who don't care about masks or social distancing, I'd recommend you get comfortable with that. Secondly, from the show, there's a weird thing that kind of came from my time on AGT where people kind of got this idea that I was a better act because there was no audience. And if you ask anybody who shows, they can tell you without a shadow of a doubt, I am far more impressive in person than I am over the television. So be prepared to walk through a very emotional journey with me is all the advice I can give you when you come to my show.
Well, I would definitely encourage everyone to, get tickets to a show, whether it's in Houston, Dallas, or one of other Brandon's tour stops. And actually, we're going to give some tickets away for the Houston show. So just text Brandon to 713-360-0133. If you do that, within the next week, we'll respond back and we'll let you know if you've won tickets. So just text Brandon to 713-360-0133. Brandon, it's been absolutely a pleasure to have you on the Business Communicators podcast. And I know you've got an incredibly busy schedule, so we're really thankful to have your time. But for those out there that maybe want to get to know you a little bit more, what is the best way for them to get in touch with you on social media?
Holla at me on Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube. You can also holla at me on Twitter. I don't really use it, but I go on there maybe once a week. And everything's the same. It's just Brandon Leake, Leake. I believe all my accounts are verified now, so you'll know it's me versus the fake accounts that have randomly popped up. I never thought there'd be a day people would be trying to fake to be me, but things happen. And don't be offended if you DM me and I don't respond. I try to protect my peace, and the fact of the matter is, before I was ever in this position, I would be very intentional about responding to people, but also very intentional with the fact that my life is bigger than social media. So I don't always respond to DMs because I get thousands of them now. So if you don't get a response, don't hold it against me. Charge it to my head, not my heart. And it's due to the fact that I'm making sure that the people who I love most are getting the best of me. So there we go.
That's awesome. Be sure to check Brandon out on social media and also follow him. Go check out his shows here in Houston and Dallas. But Brandon, thank you so much for joining us. We look forward to seeing you in Texas in a few weeks.
Adios.
Take care. Thanks, Brandon. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the Business Communicators.